Finally, we are going to move on to the quadratic formula. Many of you will say, why didn't you show me that so long ago? Well, it's kind of like the bow at the end of what we're doing. We have done a lot of work. Starting back in chapter 8, we were foiling, we were distributing, we were taking factors and turning them into trinomials or polynomials. Then when we got to chapter 9, I had you work backwards, so to say. We would sometimes factor, find numbers that added to B but multiplied to C, or we even had to do bigger problems where I had to use the so-called ACB chart. Finally, in lesson 10.1 and 10.2, I started having you graph these. We would work with the line of symmetry where x equals the opposite of b divided by 2a. We would find the vertex, and then we would find the roots. And you know the roots are the x-intercepts. Over the last few days, we have been completing the square. We wanted perfect square trinomials. We couldn't say prime anymore. We figured out how to find C that we could come up with decimal answers every time. Solid decimal answers, we wouldn't have to guess. About 4.5. We'd find out exactly what it was. Now we're going to use the quadratic formula, and you will love it if you know how to work a calculator. Many of you have this calculator. It's awesome, $12 from Meijer, but it cannot do the quadratic formula all at one time. It needs to be broken down and chunked. So let's review. X means the roots here. When I say solve for x, I'm asking you to find the roots, which we know are the x-intercepts, or the zeros. It is the opposite of b divided by plus and minus the square root b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. That is a huge equation. It is one you're going to have to memorize. But again, our calculators can't do it all at once, so we're going to group it together. Like I did with completing the square, I started with a pretty simple one. We could factor this one. I need two numbers that add a -2 but multiply to -35. Many of you are becoming very proficient on this. X minus 7 times x plus 5. Set it equal to 0. My roots would be 7 and -5, the x-intercepts. I always like to start with some that are not super complex so we can work on the procedure instead of getting bogged down with crazy numbers. Just a reminder, there's A, B is -2, and C is -35. So x equals the opposite of b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. The first thing I like to do is substitute numbers in for letters, being very careful with all of my negative signs. So I have -2 squared minus 4 times 1 times -35. I just keep looking up at this equation, substituting numbers in for the variables, and then 2 times a. I like to just chunk it real slow, break it down. Don't make silly mistakes because we're rushing. Well, we know the opposite of -2 is 2. -2 squared is 4. -4 times 1 times -35 is positive 140, all divided by 2. 2 times 1 is 2. I am then going to simplify under the radical sign. So I would have x equals 2 plus the square root of 144 all divided by 2. And I would have x equals 2 minus the square root of 144 all divided by 2. Way back at the beginning of the year when we were just working on order of operations, you realize this is a division problem. You will need to solve your numerators first and then divide by 2. So we know 2 plus 12 equals 14. Divide by 2, x would be 7. 2 minus 12 is negative 10. Divided by 2, x would equal negative 5, which, hallelujah, is exactly what we got up here. When you're given a math problem like this, you can solve it any way you want now. As long as you do it correctly, we should always get the same answer. I like to just practice with simple ones and move on. So again, A, B, and C. I might just quick check. Are there numbers that add to negative 7? That multiply to negative 8? Yeah, I could simply factor this one. But for practice sake, I will be using the quadratic formula also. I also do like to write the equation or the formula down a few times. It helps me get it stuck in my brain. I'm hoping that song video helped. So being very careful as I go, x equals the opposite of b, plus or minus, the square root of b squared minus 4ac, being very careful with all my negative signs, all divided by 2a. Working my way through it, I would have 7 plus or minus 49. Negative times negative is positive. 4 times 1 times 8, 32, all over 2. So I would have 7 plus, if I added that together, I get 81 divided by 2, and 7 minus the square root of 81 divided by 2. Working very carefully, 7 plus 9 divided by 2, 16 divided by 2 is 8. 7 minus 9 divided by 2 is negative 2 divided by 2, and I would get negative 1. Again, please always use your method. We have multiple choices on how to solve factoring, graphing, completing the square, and now the quadratic. You may choose any method you would like.